Coming up on episode 52 of the Upful LIFE Podcast.
But it was like someone had taken my brain and put it on the internet. I always thought of rap as kind of this ever-expanding web of, or rap lyrics in particular, and music because of sampling, like this ever-expanding web of references and call-outs. And, so if I would hear someone say something and it'd be a reference to an earlier song, I would almost visualize it as something resembling a hyperlink anyway. And so to actually see that on the internet was stunning. And I quickly got far too deeply involved in that website, initially as a hobby. It's not like if someone had said, do you want to work there? It would have been like asking, do you want to win the lottery? Like, do I want to have my job be the thing I spend all my spare time doing? Sure. Yeah, it sounds great. I'd also, love to come across a big bag of money on the ground. But, it didn't seem possible. But, eventually, some VC money came in. It became a part-time and then a full-time job. And by the time that ended, I was sort of deeply enough ensconced in that world that I, was like, well, okay, I'm doing this now. And ended up, freelancing for a few years, writing for Forbes, doing some other stuff, and then ending up at Complex.
I thought you had it. You recognize it.
I love you very much.
Many people like him.
Where all the noise goes.
Let's drink a toast forever and ever. Let's drink a toast forever and ever.
Yes, indeedy. Welcome to the Upful LIFE Podcast. I'm your host, B. Getz, and this is episode number 52, coming at you live and direct from the Vibe Junkie studio in Oakland, California. December 2021, finishing strong. Love y'all. So grateful you are tuning in. Yes, indeedy, and we're back. Episode number 52. The last one of 2021. What a year. Man. Yeah, just kind of shaking my head. Wondering where we're headed. I want to say thank you to everybody who tunes into this podcast, supports the work that I do in print and on the pod waves. Give thanks, a deep bow of gratitude, and with everything happening in the culture wars and division and, of course, the surge of Omicron, it's overwhelming and emotional, sensory, anxiety overload. And I just want to tell everyone, I love you. Stay safe, stay sane. Stay something. Before we got to this heightened time of fear and panic once again, things were kind of slowly and steadily getting back together as far as at least music and the music industry and touring artists and parties and such. And maybe that was premature. I don't know, but it felt good for a minute. I saw a few Lettuce shows, which I wrote up on Live for Live Music. You can check that out. I caught my man Will Blades. I saw Mike Dillon with Brian Haas and Nikki Glaspie as the Punkadelic Project. Went to some great parties up in Nevada City, live DJs in the woods around Thanksgiving. Just feel good vibes were happening, and I hate to see the air start to change and momentum shift in a direction that's frankly foreboding and quite troubling. And that's never mind to say all the socio-cultural, political stuff. I'm not even going to touch that shit. Just wanted to take this time where I normally like plug some business or endeavor of a collaborator, friend, or peer. Hopefully someday a sponsor. Instead, I just wanted to talk directly to the audience, and I don't know. I said what I said. I said a lot of things about a lot of albums and music this year in a feature, my annual favorite albums of the year on Upful Life, and I'll get into a bit of that after the interview, but that's what I had going on since we last spoke. Thanks for everyone who tuned in to the Neil Francis pod. Crazy, he was on like a gang of podcasts right around the same time, obviously with the new album coming out. So yeah, I loved that episode, and I loved the feedback, and I just wanted to, let everyone know that I really appreciate all the good vibes, all the empowerment as we move into 2022. We'll see what happens. It's been a string of really difficult losses of late, and not the least of which was last week with Hub from The Roots, longtime bass player. And as some of you know, I go way back with the legendary Roots crew, Illadelph's Illest, You Know How We Do. And I couldn't help but put pen to paper or digitally to say what I had to say about the passing of Leonard Hubbard, best known as Hub. Black Thought liked to introduce him as Leonardo Del Hubrio, international bass pimp. So I wrote a bit of a reflection on his passing. You can find that on upfullife.com. I didn't write anything on the passing of Robbie Shakespeare, of Sly and Robbie, the greatest reggae bass player of all time, truly a king among men. Black Uhuru is my favorite reggae band, and the Sly and Robbie era with Michael Rose and Ducky and Puma, that's just like pure drugs as far as music goes. And I mean, Robbie, you could just check out his discography. He's played with everyone, not just reggae artists. I'm talking about runs the gamut. And he passed suddenly, as far as I know. I didn't have any word that he was ill or sick, so it was really a shock to the system to hear that news. Barry Harris, another one gone right in the same week. But I really wanted to talk a bit about the passing of GREG TATE. Big part of why I want to do that is especially the nature of today's episode, which is about hip-hop, with tremendous hip-hop journalist, author, podcast OG, who, he nor I would probably be where we are without the iconic and, forget trend setting. He kicked the door down, writing about hip hop music, writing about the lineage between, all the eras and genres and cultures of black music that came before hip hop, and wrote about hip hop in the moment, and wrote about music as something deeper and more profound than entertainment or even just art. And that spoke to so many people. I'm going to share some other folks' thoughts of GREG TATE. My boy Randy sent me his book during the pandemic, early in the pandemic, Flyboy and the Buttermilk, which is a collection of essays that he had written over time about music. Put it out in 92. But before that, I read him in the Village Voice and Vibe magazine, and really a number of places over the years. And I don't know that there's really any other journalist in that space or in my lifetime quite as revered in the same space, in the same way, in the same, he was a unicorn, and we're going to hear just a little bit why here. I want to start with just who he was. GREG TATE, a journalist and critic whose articles for the Village Voice, Rolling Stone, and other publications starting in the 1980s helped elevate hip-hop and street art to the same plane as jazz and abstract expressionism. He died on Tuesday in New York City at 64. Mr. Tate exploded on the New York cultural scene in the early 1980s, soon after graduating from Howard University, contributing freelance music reviews to The Voice. And then he joined the weekly newspaper staff in 1987, and he almost immediately became its preeminent writer on black music, art, and by extension, one of the city's leading cultural critics. New York at the time was an ebullient chaos of cultures, its downtown scene populated by street artists, struggling writers, disco DJs, punk rockers, living in cheap apartments and crowding clubs like Paradise Garage and CBGB. The Village Voice was their Bible, and Mr. Tate was very often their guide. That was Clay Risen for the New York Times. Of course, I got to give you Questlove. This one is rather different. GREG TATE was rather different. GREG was my first and in some ways truest North Star. Back in the mid-'80s, when I was 16 trying to unravel the world, someone recommended that I read GREG and the pieces he was doing in the Village Voice. Since age 10, Rolling Stone, Cream, Cashbox, Billboard, periodicals were all I knew and read cover to cover in the household. But it was far and few between when I ran across any black journalist doing any critical writing about music. I started reading his bits around 87, and I was changed forever. GREG was the first person who validated the art that I loved and made it intellectually viable. I never heard anyone speak of hip-hop in those terms before. I had never heard of Afrofuturism. I had never encountered a writer who made the case that Public Enemy was just as important as the Beatles, and who made it with such intelligence. This was during a time when my dad and I were really at odds about culture for the first time. My dad was a person who made binge record shopping, something I do to this day, an event. Music was our thing. Now we are at odds. My dad was turning into a grumpy cynic, and I didn't like it. So there was a 10-year gap in which I had no one to bounce ideas off of like I did with my dad in the 70s. Enter GREG. To see a black person write so eloquently about this, music, hip-hop, but not just hip-hop. It gave me confidence and clarity. It saved me. He made the music high art with pieces that were high art by themselves. I didn't even know that he was a musician yet, but I knew that his best instrument was his pen. That's part one. This thing is 4 parts long, but that gives you a little bit of Questlove's eulogy. And I'm going to do one more. My man Jay Smooth, who I hope to have on this podcast, who was a guest on the Cipher show, which is the podcast we're about to talk about on this episode. And he's the man from Ill Doctrine Radio, just a legend from hip-hop journalism. Much like my guest today, and in the shadow and lineage and the space that GREG TATE created. GREG TATE basically, he didn't just walk so we could run, he trudged back and forth to school, uphill both ways in a snowstorm with Sun Ra and his headphones on a 10 strip. That's me, by the way, not Jay Smooth. But that's the role he played for people like Jay Smooth or a Questlove or a Shawn Setaro or myself. Jay Smooth says, how do we begin to find the words? How does one even type out or speak the phrase, finding the words for GREG TATE? It doesn't even sound right. Because who is GREG TATE, if not the one, who always has the words for us, who sees the vision, makes the connections, reveals the lineage, invokes the spirits within, and honors how they always speak through us. In those days when almost no one thought we were worth looking at or seriously thinking about at all, he saw us, loved us, and spoke that love with so much poetry and clarity it became an architecture, a foundation we all get to build upon. There might be no better tribute than to tally in these coming days how many of us found our voice by wishing we could write like GREG TATE and realizing we never could, and we never will. But we will keep on writing, singing, spitting, creating, being, and speaking ourselves. And trying to type it out now, I can't quite bring myself around to claim he'll be speaking through us. But I want to believe if nothing else, he'll still be seeing us and knows how grateful we are. Yes, indeedy. Whew, that was intense, but had to get it out. Wanted to take a few minutes, thank everyone that's left reviews on iTunes, Apple Podcasts. Really appreciate that. You can rate and or review the pod, if you have the time and or so inclined, on Apple Podcasts, or really any podcast platform of choice. But the Apple Podcast reviews go a long way to steering those algorithms in this direction, bringing new listeners, and we give thanks for everybody that rates and reviews and tunes into this pod. Thank you so much. Also want to let you know you can reach me directly. Send me an email, b.getz@upfullife.com, b.getz@upfullife.com. Anything you want to share, any reflections, any suggestions, interpretations, constructive criticisms, you name it. Love to hear from the listeners. b.getz@upfullife.com. Of course, you can follow us on Instagram at upful_life, Facebook /upfullife, and of course, if you'd like to support the work that I do, please check me out, patreon.com /upfullife. This is Lahore State of Mind by Jaubi, Pakistani ensemble, but remixed by Al Dobson Jr. in London. So you got DJ Premier's Nas joint going all the way out to Pakistan, getting flipped with some instrumentation native to that country and tradition. Then that piece of music shipped over to England, and Al Dobson Jr. putting his twist on it. So Lahore State of Mind, Al Dobson Jr. remix. Jaubi is the artist. Now let's get into episode 52. Y'all know how we do.
Like finding feathers on a house cat. Or searching for a needle in a haystack. I guess I'll just keep on walking. I hear the people talk, whistling when you walk. Your kind is hard to find. Darling, I'm glad you're mine. I hear the people talk, whistling when you walk. Your kind is hard to find. Darling, I'm glad you're mine.
Oh shit. Episode 52 is honored and truly privileged to welcome the great Shawn Setaro, aka Same Ol Shawn, from Complex. Also, he was the longtime host of the Cipher Show podcast, which really, maybe more than any other show, directly influenced and inspired the Upful Life podcast. Shawn is also the former editor-in-chief of Rap Genius. Yep, you heard that right. He's written about music and culture for Forbes, The Atlantic, Vibe, The Source, GQ, Esquire, the Sondheim Review, and more. He's also the writer and reporter behind Infamous, the Tekashi 6ix9ine story, which was a complex Spotify podcast about the controversial rapper, and most recently, the author of Complex Presents Dummy Boy, Tekashi 6ix9ine and the 9 Trey Gangsta Bloods. A brand new book that just dropped this week, December 21st. Got pushed back a couple times, so we actually recorded this interview in the fall. But the book is out now. You can get it where books are sold. We'll talk a little bit about, well, he and I talk a whole lot about Tekashi 6ix9ine, but I'm going to give you the rundown about that because I'm sure wide swath of listeners are probably not intimately familiar with the details, so I'm going to give you the cliff notes. But before we get to that, let's talk about Shawn Setaro. This dude, literally, like not unlike a Jay Blakesberg, although much later on, is directly inspired me, is also like an example of what's possible out there when you just follow your muse and know what you're like looking for and go for it. You know, it doesn't always work out, but Shawn is a shining example of how it did and does and continues to, and how he stays ahead of the curve in the music media game while still being like having the credentials and the work and the portfolio to show that he, you know, is about it, as they say. For me with Shawn, I mean, I was familiar with Rap Genius, of course, but it wasn't until I was out on the weed farm, Mikey Dread. Shout out Mikey Dread. You know, I spent so much time out there working, and my man Jackson Whalen was out there a bunch too. Underground MC, producer. He's been on the show. Anyway, that's really where he and I met and became good friends. And we bonded over hip hop, and we listened to pretty much every episode, 200 plus episodes of the Cipher show, which is basically a much better, more professional, more thorough version of what I try to accomplish here, which is long form interviews with not just the artists themselves, but people in the culture and flies on the wall, as Shawn borrows, I think from Say Adams maybe, in our interview. And he just created a universe of like hip hop scholarship by way of podcasting. And it was that show and Juan Epstein, which was Peter Rosenberg's podcast alongside Cipher Sounds. So those two podcasts really kicked down the door for me to be a culture reporter. And I was like, all right, I want to port that stuff to my universe. But really, same old Shawn, which is what he went by in the early days on the Cipher and probably Rap Genius too. Same old Shawn. He went to Berkeley School of Music, College of Music in Boston, where Lettuce was born, right around the same time. There's an Adam Deitch shout out on an episode of the Cipher, but I won't spoil that. There's, of course, Shawn's path as a musician, and then his sort of redirection as a writer, journalist, author, podcaster, which, again, mirrors my own. And it was all those hours and hours and hours of just the mindless of trimming weed, bucking weed, just being in the barn, working, and being able to just, you know, binge on the Cipher. And it took me back to the days of like okplayer.com, which is where I used to binge on like hip hop culture and reporting and commiserating with other people like myself, a message board through the OK Player website, and that sort of fizzled out with social media, and podcasting has sort of filled that role, and no other show like the Cipher lit the fuse under me, put the battery in my back, and of course I took the opportunity to tell Shawn that. All this to say, he has the ability to tell a story in a different way as a writer than as he does as an interviewer, and he's able to take both of those and sort of channel them and harness them with his projects in the zeitgeist, namely the Tekashi 6ix9ine stuff. So, man, Let me tell you, first off, Shawn is such an incredible journalist that I've listened to all the Tekashi 6ix9ine podcasts that he did through Complex and read his book cover to cover in 2 sittings. And I find the content objectionable, repugnant, deplorable, to borrow a term. So that tells you how good he is at what he does and the team he's put together. So since we talk at length, he came on the show because he's promoting the book, and he's been on some other podcasts as well, but I don't know that they were quite like our interview. Same I could say for Neil Francis last week. But with regard to the Tekashi 6ix9ine project, he wrote this book, again, Complex Presents Dummy Boy, Tekashi 6ix9ine and the 9 Trey Gangsta Bloods. And that's how we came on the show, but we took it back. We talked Cipher, we talked Rap Genius, everything. But let me give you the 411 on Tekashi 6ix9ine. It's a complicated one to say the least. The rapper, born Danny Hernandez, infiltrated the world of hip-hop by becoming the clown prince of rap. He leveraged his polarizing persona and trolling other artists to become a constant topic of conversation. 6ix9ine's ascent was paused, however, when he was arrested on racketeering charges, weapons, drugs, in 2018 due to his affiliation with the 9 Trey Gangster Bloods. 6ix9ine's subsequent escape from life, or a life sentence, in part by snitching on his fellow gang members, is a story that's just as chaotic as his rap career, and trying to make sense of it all is a daunting task. That's where Shawn Setaro comes in. Journalist, podcaster, author. He's been reporting on the rapper long before the racketeering charges were brought against him. Now, he had never written a book before, but he said that this project, Dummy Boy, the podcast, and of course the book, was born out of a realization that after covering 6ix9ine extensively through his articles and podcasting, the next logical step was to put it into a book. And I think right there is a microcosm of everything I just said. His journey, his skill set, his relationships, his process, harnesses all that, takes this story out of the zeitgeist, and you'll hear the rest of how he went from 0 to 100 with this whole thing over the course of a couple years. Just got to give you a little bit of the Pop Smoke 411 as well. He was dubbed the new King of New York within just a year of his debut, and he was a rapid rise to the mainstream, became the face and pioneer of Brooklyn's rising drill scene, and his life was cut short, shot in a robbery, February 19th, 2020, my birthday. It happened in Los Angeles. I happened to be in Los Angeles that day. I remember it well. Anyway, new Spotify podcast called Complex Subject Pop Smoke, and it's a posthumous in-depth look and a tribute to the rapper, and it's a 6-episode series that unpacks his life and death as told by the people closest to him, his whirlwind final months, and a legacy he leaves behind. So we talk a bit about that, Shawn and I do, as that was in the process of coming out week by week when we chatted. It also sent me down the rabbit hole of learning about drill music culture, which I, much to the chagrin of my fiance, I spend quite a bit of time watching Trap Lore Ross on YouTube, but that's a story for another time. Just fascinating, in-depth documentaries about drill music culture and the violence associated with it, and also the musical evolution, and man, it's head-scratching stuff. But nonetheless, whole lot to unpack with my guy Shawn Setaro, same old Shawn. Inspired me as much as anyone to have this show, and you're about to hear just how and why. Again, check him out, Shawn Setaro from Complex. The book is called Dummy Boy, the story of Tekashi 6ix9ine and the 9 Trey Gangsta Bloods. Y'all gonna learn today. Yes, indeedy. Upful Life Podcast, episode 52. Here comes Same Old Shawn.
Hey, yo, what is a cipher?
We are talking about art here.
Guess I'm just the same old Shawn.
The knowledge of the cipher is to enlighten you.
come from? The gods. Cause you tried to jump the cipher and it goes this way.
Welcome to the Cipher. I'm your host, Shawn Setaro.
Right on. Well, this is a long time in the making, and it is a real honor and privilege and pleasure to speak with a journalist and a podcaster and a presence in the not just hip hop community, but popular music community and culture at large. Somebody I admire, respect, and listen and read regularly. And that is the one and only same old Shawn, Mr. Shawn Setaro. Welcome to the Upful Life Podcast.
Thank you so much, Brian. I really, really appreciate it. I'm just really, really glad to be here and to talk to you.
Yeah, likewise. And like I said, I've been listening to you, reading you for a long time. As somebody who exists in, music, print media, and a fledgling podcaster, you really are a trailblazer for so many of us. I can't stress enough how much your work has influenced me and my peers, shown us new avenues, new ways to tell stories, to report, to embed and immerse ourselves in the culture. A lot of people say with the advent of the internet that like deep journalism went by the wayside. And I think you're a shining example to the contrary.
Thank you, Brian. Really, that means a ton to hear. I really appreciate it. I've always just tried to do what I was curious about, what I was interested in. And it's been fantastic to see that it has found and continues to find an audience. We'll get into this later, but obviously what this book is about, what I spent the past few years doing is very different than the Cipher, right? It's very, my work at Complex and my work, especially in podcasting, is different, but I obviously see through lines because I'm the same person doing it. And it's been good to see people who, know me from that show, follow, trust me enough to take the leap into this other stuff as well. And, you're obviously an example of that. And I've just been so grateful to see it.
Yeah, man. I found it to be a curious leap, and I made it with no trepidation. Obviously, the 6ix9ine story is not, as you stated, really in the paradigm that might have been covered on the Cipher or even Rap Genius before that. But no doubt it's omnipresent in the culture, and there's a lot of lessons to be learned outside of just art. So I do want to talk about your whole journey and your whole path that led you up to the 6ix9ine project. But let's start now, and then we'll jump in the Wayback Machine. I know you mentioned you spent the better part of a few years on this story.
Mm-hmm.
So how does it even arrive on your desk to pursue? What was the moment where you said, okay, I'm going to do a story on Tekashi 6ix9ine, and why?
So I was aware of him before all this started, a couple months before everything started. DJ Academics actually brought him to the Complex office to try to introduce him to writers. And I stayed out of the way. I regret that now, of course. Now I think, I wish I could have asked him, 18 million things. But, so I was obviously between that and just general, awareness of the scene, I knew what was going on. There's video relics of that day, by the way. I think he did, a video interview, not with me, that day with Act that's still on the internet somewhere. But yeah, so I knew who he was. And if you think back to the summer of 2018, right, there were a lot of the whole sort of SoundCloud rap scene was in full swing, right? Mm-hmm. And people at traditional media, legacy media, whatever you want to call it, were, at least at Complex, were debating how to cover it. There didn't seem to be a clear path because a lot of these artists simply didn't care about press in the way that, older artists had. They could just go on social media, speak directly to their fans. And also, some of them, including Tekashi, had, either rumored or confirmed personal behavior issues that made it so, you couldn't just be like, oh, here's a cool new song they did. There had to be something else there.
Right.
And we were trying to thread that needle. And I actually remember someone at Complex, one of the higher ups in the editorial side, he said, what about that Treyway guy who's always around Tekashi? Like, maybe that guy's a way in. That's the person we now know as Shoddy, Kafano Jordan. But at that time, no one knew his name. I would say almost venture to say no one outside of a handful of people in New York and New Jersey, knew his name, right? And I certainly didn't. And that was the summer of 2018. That started me just kind of looking into him. Who is this guy? Who's posting about him? Who are all these other people who were, posting about this Treyway thing? And, after a few months of that, in November, the arrest happened. And that started the whole, I started going to court and things just kind of spiraled from there.
I know what you mean with regard to, the Treyway guy in the midst and him being this sort of like looming figure. I've obviously come to know all about him through your reporting, your book, the Showtime program, the podcast. So it's interesting to hear that it had such just a really rather innocuous beginnings. Wasn't an atomic bomb right away, but swiftly became so. And, in my circle, just discussing the book a little bit with some friends that I know from like the OK Player days and people I really respect, their kind of hip hop acumen. None of them have gotten a chance to read the book, but most of them have listened to the podcast and a couple of them watched the program on television. And I think what you did such an incredible job of doing was tell the human story behind these people and their lives and their, socioeconomic predicaments and their, nuclear family structures and criminal behaviors learned from generations. And while that's not new territory, it felt like it for this generation, for the so-called SoundCloud rap culture, if you will. And there have been a number of cautionary tales that have spiraled out of that era, if you will. Naturally, Lil Peep comes to mind, somebody I would have never imagined that I'd find intriguing as an artist or a human, also shown to be a really human story and a tragic one at that. Yours is less drugs, more criminal in terms of the Tekashi story, but also a tragic figure and tale that is so much deeper than just an asshole on Instagram. Yeah. And I think definitely. I was curious, how did you peel back the layers to, in essence, get really intimate details and stories and narratives from, the individuals' lives, who are these, as we noted, shadowy figures with, internet surnames and gang names they've taken. And obviously they're not usually the inclined people to allow a reporter or someone not of their set or culture or block so inside. I'm just curious, how did you navigate that?
Sure. So I got my information from a bunch of sources, interviews, as you mentioned, or some of them. And I think, doing hundreds of interviews of all sorts of people over the years, maybe more than hundreds, was part of it. You develop a set of tools for talking to people, right? And a set of skills and an approach. And part of that is really trying to enter the room with foreknowledge, right? With advanced knowledge and with respect. And that works, and that works with Elzai and it works with Ms. Treyway. People know if you are taking them seriously and people want to tell their story. And with Tekashi, with Danny, there were so many people who felt like they were at least in part responsible for his success, and he had ignored them, thrown them to the side, left them behind. And they were, they were happy to share once I found them, once we found them, once the team found them, they were happy to share, what, I wrote that verse, or, I was the one who got all the people out to that video shoot, or whatever it was. Or, I was the one who, made sure he could go to all those clubs in Connecticut safely, or whatever, whatever it was. People were willing to share their side of the story.
Word. Yeah, I find that really telling, that, he left this trail of betrayal behind him even before he turned state's evidence. He had discarded people who'd made him. And you do a really great job of laying that groundwork of the relationships, how they happened, with the original, scum crew from Brooklyn and some of the original, I don't want to call it whatever the blood set was pre-Treyway. Like, it was just, I would never have been able to really grasp the nuanced nature of these relationships and how they were broken or why they were broken, and how that ended up coming back to bite him. And you got in there and you really were able to piece it together. You mentioned the word team. So I'm curious, when does it become less Shawn Setaro, the reporter, and then you have a Spotify podcast, and correct me if I'm wrong, but was it Showtime for the TV?
So, I am in Vikram Gandhi's documentary, which is on Hulu, but I'm an interview subject there. I wasn't like a producer on it or anything.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking of. Yeah. Because I do remember seeing you on the screen.
Vikram is great. He's a friend. We certainly have talked about the case plenty, but that is his movie. I am just an interview subject in it. But
I got you.
Yeah, I guess to the team issue, certainly, like, I started out court reporting, going to court, figuring out what was going on and writing about it. And also was talking to a coworker at Complex, this woman, Shiva, who is in charge of podcasts. And we developed this idea of doing a narrative podcast, right? And eventually got approval to make it about 6ix9ine. And, before anyone else got involved, it was the two of us doing interviews, getting all sorts of people over to the Complex office and interviewing them and going through the tape and putting it together. As time went on, eventually we, got partners in Spotify. We got a budget. We were able to bring on Ann Hepperman, who's sort of our executive producer, really helped us put it together. We were able to bring on a fantastic editor in Catherine St. Louis. And, it was a pretty small team, but those were the core people in the podcast. Obviously, there's other people who like did the music, Jordan Granados, and, sound designer, mixer, shouts to all of them. Incidentally, all of the music in that series, almost all of the original music, is done by Jordan, who produced many of Tekashi's early songs. So just kind of a little sort of Easter egg in there. But yeah, it was, this very small team that worked on putting the podcast together. And obviously the reporting done for that formed the basis of a lot of stuff in the book. So it was a mix of doing interviews for the podcast and then just going to court and keeping up on the court stuff constantly. And I will say that, for me, going to every single court hearing was tremendously helpful. Even the ones Tekashi wasn't at, even the ones that really had almost nothing to do with him, even the ones that were just like, okay, we're only here to set a date for the next thing. Going to as many of those as I could get advance notice of was extremely helpful and, really helped shape the whole experience.
I bet. Actually found that unique because I went to a murder trial that I covered for a college thing. There was a murder in my hometown many, many years ago, and I'll spare you the details, but basically I went to court. It was a hung jury, so 2 murder trials, and I understand the nature of the little contextual things that happen. Maybe if somebody doesn't take a stand, but there's a ruling made, or all kinds of stuff that happens just by being present, and that really brings me to something I wanted to discuss, and we can even fold in the Pop Smoke podcast that you recently wrote. Where the Cipher, which when we get into that. Too, but the Cipher for me, just the definitive interview styled rap nerd minutia, really, really deep, 30,000 leagues, culture, and it's not, my own pod is not too different from that in terms of structurally, and I draw a lot of inspiration from that. But the true crime episodic narrative podcast is a different lane. And the true crime, it's very popular. It can be kind of like sensationalist, but at the same time, it's like, you binge them and you can't wait to get to the next episode. So you were able to in essence, commingle what you established with the Cipher with your hip hop credentials and your, thumb on the pulse of the culture for decades. That port that over to like the true crime episodic narrative. I was just going to ask, was your process considerably different? Did you find that your experience with the Cipher or Complex or Rap Genius was a boon to the work, or was it inhibitive in any way? I'm just curious, how this changed, the modus operandi.
Sure. I mean, it's a good question. I can't go back and do the Tekashi experience without having done the Cipher. So I there's no way to A/B it, right? So I don't know if I can totally untangle that, but I'll do my best. Yeah, I mean, first of all, it was, having done the Cipher was, for one thing, great in that it made me want to continue podcasting, even after the show sort of took its indefinite hiatus. I knew that world, that space, and I knew how to interview people. Now, doing the kind of interviewing for a narrative show, sometimes it's different. And this was where I was glad to have, other people from the more traditional audio world to help, with that process. But basically, it was this basic inquisitiveness that just got transferred from, how did you make that song? What did that lyric mean? To what the hell happened in this crazy story? Because, now once Tekashi has testified, once the book has been written, it's all pretty laid out. While I was working on this, we were uncovering it bit by bit, trying to figure out things that had happened just a few months prior. What went down, what were the real dynamics, what were the real relationships, figuring it out, day by day. And so so I think just keeping that same basic level of inquisitiveness of following, what is interesting about this was key. One big thing I had to learn, of course, was writing for the ear. The Cipher was, Josh did a fantastic job editing and inserting stuff, and he cut out 1,000 ums and uhs from me. But it was in a sort of philosophical sense, a lightly edited show, in that what you heard was almost everything important in the conversation that we actually had. And the writing for the ear was limited to intros and outros, right? Mm-hmm. This is just a whole different animal. Not only am I writing for the ear, but I'm writing for Angie Martinez. The voice of New York is going to say whatever the hell I put on the paper.
Baby boy, Hot 97. Huh? Oh, shut up. Wings of Morning. It's Hot 97. Angie cooling out with you. Battle of the Beats. Yes, y'all. In a couple of minutes, I got Brandy and Wanye right now. It's Hot 97.
So, which is needless to say why we had editors for that program. And, Catherine did just an incredible job. And that took some learning. That took some, that was a big process of just like going from writing long articles where you can have 2 or 3 clauses or speaking to someone extemporaneously, going from that to writing narration for somebody, and you want to have it not only be understandable the first time someone hears it, it has to sound authentic to someone who's not me and who has a decades long, persona in public. Right.
Right.
And so Angie was great at that. She would always stop us and say, I would never say that. That doesn't sound like me. And, in the middle of recording, sometimes we would work on rephrasing stuff. So, she was just a great partner in that sense.
That's cool, because she really wanted to be authentic from her voice and sound as if she would have said it otherwise.
Yeah. I mean, look, people, I am under no illusion that people pay attention to credits. I would imagine for 90% of the people who listen to it, to the extent they thought about it at all, they would think, oh, that's, just something Angie's saying.
Right.
Or that's something Angie's thinking. And so we want to make it clear that it has to be something that she's comfortable talking about coming out of her mouth. This was also, an issue in the Pop Smoke show as well. Punch was always our final, or Punch was always our final backstop, right? Is this, authentic to you? Would you say this? How would you say this? And, a lot of some of the stuff was, essentially him riffing and a lot of ideas in the narration were taken from conversations with him.
Word. Yeah. It's interesting. The parallels there, because, you have, like you said, the voice of New York City, Angie Martinez, really narrating what is in essence the story of New York City of this time in hip hop culture. And then, with Punch and Pop Smoke, and I have to say, I'm not that familiar with Pop Smoke until, I knew a little bit, and then I listened to the pod and listened to a bunch more, but I remember Punch, of course. So to have an old timer or, another generation back from Canarsie supervise and narrate and tell an authentic story about a cat from his neighborhood. I thought that was, again, super authentic and a testament to the power of the narrative is coming from those voices and what they represent in the culture. Real quick, before we turn the page on Dummy Boy, what is the date of release?
Sure. So Dummy Boy, Tekashi 6ix9ine and the 9 Trey Gangster Bloods, published by Kingston Imperial. It will be out, I just found out today, in late November. The original street date was October 12th, but, COVID is wreaking havoc with supply lines all over the world. Find it on wherever you buy books, that big place or the other places. You can pre-order it anywhere you find books.
And
the audiobook as well, narrated by the fantastic Dion Graham. That will be available for pre-order very soon.
That's good to know. And we'll put a link in the show notes for sure. And the official name of the Spotify podcast on Tekashi.
Sure. Infamous, the Tekashi 6ix9ine story. And that you can find that, on Spotify. So search for that. You'll see, Tekashi's photo. That's as the key art. So
I'm sure there's a lot of people who've snitched over the years in hip hop, but very rarely has it ever appeared on such a scale.
Tekashi 6ix9ine came out of nowhere to become 2018's biggest new rapper. One day, he's Danny Hernandez, a young kid making deli sandwiches in Bushwick. The next, everyone knew his trademark tattoos and rainbow hair. He had 15 million followers on Instagram. He collaborated with superstars like Nicki Minaj, Kanye West, 50 Cent, and Young Thug. And then, only 1 year later, he became something else. Hip-hop's most infamous cooperating witness.
Mr. Hernandez, do you recognize anyone in the courtroom who was a member of 9 Trey when you were a member? Yes.
I'm Angie Martinez. And this is Infamous, the Tekashi 6ix9ine story.
But yeah, you can definitely, again, narrated by Angie Martinez, Complex and Spotify production. You can find that on Spotify.
Right on. And speaking of, touch on Pop Smoke for a second. I'm curious, the genesis of that story for you. I know obviously his tragic killing had it definitely in the zeitgeist, but sadly, that's not a tale unique to him. What about Pop Smoke as his story or his music or whatever? What called to you to say, I want to tell this one next?
Sure. It was a number of things. I think the impact he had on New York City in just such a short time. If you were to call back to the summer of 2019, you could not go anywhere without hearing a song of his. I mean,
baby, welcome to the party. I hit the boy up and then I go skating a Rari. Baby, welcome to the party. Picture my thought, get me lit. Gun on my head. One in the head. Send in the clip. Baby, don't trip. Just lower your tone. Cause you can get hit. Don't let that hit in my system. I get your body. Next day I forget it. Nigga try just call the body. And this one again, nigga, I was just with him.
Unfortunately, sadly, that was also true for the summer of 2020 for somewhat different reasons because he had, he died by that time. But, he released his first song at like the tail end of 2018, and 6 months later, he's ubiquitous in New York City. Like and his rise coincided with really the national rise of this whole entire sound, this Brooklyn drill sound, right? And so there was that. There were obviously the tragic circumstances of his death. I had actually been at his court hearing, unfortunately the sole court hearing in a case, public hearing in a case, where he was arrested on federal charges for this alleged car theft. So that was the one time I saw him in person. Although I didn't get to speak to him, he snuck out the back way that day, I recall, ducking me and a handful of other reporters. There's actually a whole thing about that day in the podcast, whole episode, part of an episode about that day. So, I was intimately familiar with the details of that case and suspected from the beginning that the federal government didn't much care about a stolen car and was more interested in what they thought they knew about his gang ties. So that was hanging over it as well. It obviously is a story that resonates deeply with the Complex audience. So it just, when we wanted to put together a podcast, our music team had just done a story about Brooklyn drill, a whole cover story. And it was like, well, can we take that idea that was so successful and kind of expand it? And, doing the podcast was also a way of kind of taking Complex's previous coverage of drill, of Brooklyn drill specifically, and kind of expanding it into a new medium.
In just 1 year, Pop Smoke became the hottest rapper from New York. He took Brooklyn drill from his hometown streets and brought it to the mainstream. New York rap was back.
Pop Smoke in the building. Pop Smoke.
But just as fast as he rose, Pop was gone.
According to TMZ, Pop Smoke was just shot and killed.
Damn. Today it's hard to go anywhere without hearing Pop Smoke, but it's another thing to have actually known him. I'm DJ Punch. I grew up down the street from Pop in Canarsie, Brooklyn. I saw him way before the fame and the big records, when he was just a little crip in the town and was going viral on World Star for Fights. Welcome to Complex Subject, a new podcast series that dives deep into the untold stories behind the defining artists and moments of our time. So, who better to start with than Pop Smoke?
Right on. Yeah, I got to tell you, it's really interesting to hear you frame it in the context of Brooklyn drill and the impact that had not only on the city of New York, but hip hop in general, and evidenced by the meteoric rise of Pop Smoke in such a short period of time. I'm curious. I'm reminded of the scene. I'm a big Wire guy, and there's a scene from The Wire where Poot is kind of talking about, they say the new generation, they're bad, they're worse. Wait till you get a load of them, and it's kind of like this cyclical thing where the next generation is harder and worse and more violent. And we've been seeing that, going back to like Paris, when his album came out, all through NWA, and then of course the West Coast G-Funk and Tupac and Big and so forth. Now you're seeing, I obviously started in Chicago, and which is, as violent as it can possibly be. But you're seeing it in Jacksonville and obviously in Brooklyn with drill music and the culture that surrounds, where they're calling out their ops in the songs and referencing real life murders. I mean, it happened to this, I'm from Philly. It happened to this guy, A-Rab, not that long ago, where they played his own music in court detailing certain killings and stuff. So I'm asking you, as somebody who has been a fan and a reporter and chronicled the culture, is this the same movie we're seeing going back to Paris, or is it that much more brutal, violent, and in essence ugly in 2021 with the drill thing?
I mean, there's a whole lot in there, and I would say, like, you can't look at drill music without looking at the way, without looking at a couple of things. One of the things we get out of the podcast is, yes, drill and gangs are interrelated. You can't, especially in a Brooklyn drill context, you can't separate that out. So much of the subject matter of the music is about, like you said, very specific street issues. There are sort of these two, to put it simply, two kind of confederations of different sets that, at least as the time period we're speaking of in Pop Smoke, a kind of like 2018, 2019, 2020, sort of their conflict, motivated a lot of this music.
I'm posting on the lens, I be forcing. Belly truck when I'm sliding, my bitch is exotic. My hands off the wheel when I'm parking. James told me get the cash. I'm married to denims, don't ask what it cost him. He gave me to the course if you SRK. Let's talk about it if you feel away. Nigga, everything cake. Big 24, don't call me bluff. Kick down the door. Big when I do, show the remorse. Mine designer, all in the stores.
At the same time, I want to say, like, this is music, and artists, the people talking about this stuff and the people sort of on the front lines of whatever is happening in the streets, sometimes they're the same, a lot of times they're different, and may just, know each other. And you want to keep in mind that, like, it is music, so there's room for artistic license, exaggeration, things like this. And a lot of artists' songs are being treated, and videos are being treated by authorities as confessions. And there's a lot of scariness going on in there. I'm actually in the middle of working on something right now about a lot of these issues around rap and policing. And, it's really thorny. I mean, especially if you look at Pop, Pop Smoke was, I feel very comfortable saying, really, really squeezed by the feds, right? Which is not because he did anything, but because they suspected that he knew stuff, right? They suspected he knew something about a couple specific incidents about his gang, whatever. And they knew he was a big star and had a lot to lose.
Right.
So it's a complicated, thorny situation. I always want to be clear, though, that we are talking about art here, right? And that's something to keep in mind. As far as the music, I would say that, like, the music, how a lot of the music is in Brooklyn drill and other stuff, like the scenes you're talking about in Jacksonville, it relates to how social media is used in a lot of ways. There's a more direct approach, right? You can just say someone's name and a thing that happened in the same way you might in a Facebook post,
right? Because
you want credit for it, you want clout for it. It's no good if someone doesn't know you did something, right? This is, and social media or songs are the way of broadcasting that. We saw this in the Tekashi case too, right? Like, why did Tekashi film his friends committing an armed robbery and then send it to DJ Academics to put on the internet? You know, it wasn't because he wanted to be caught. That was, you know, he didn't think that was possible. It was, or maybe it didn't even enter his head. I don't know. It was about showing I got one up on Jay Prince. I got one up on Rap-A-Lot. So I think that this, you know, how the music is relates to how social media is used.
That is an excellent point. And I actually probably should have touched on that with Tekashi as well. The role of social media and the sort of a disconnect where people just put their crimes on IG Live or in a song. And yeah, with regard to the art, I think a big difference for me is art. And I guess art is subjective, but for all the, you know, music that represented, you know, urban culture in the 80s and 90s, what Chuck D called the ghetto CNN, you know, there was a sort of street poetry, a sort of, like you said, an imagination, artistic license. There was also like mitigation where there was a Bloods Crips peace song. There was Stop the Violence in New York City. There was We're All in the Same Gang in LA. You saw artists getting together and building community in music. And I'm just wondering if that's even possible in the current landscape.
I mean, sure, there are, you know, efforts at truces and people collaborating and all of this kind of stuff who might not otherwise, but also, you know, keep in mind that we are, you know, we're talking about a business, we're talking about what sells, and if, you know, one side or another in a gang rivalry is getting record deals and selling, you know, that stuff is going to continue to get pushed. We get into this a little bit in the dynamics of this a little bit in the Pop Smoke podcast. You know, there's a moment where we sort of lay out how, you know, Chef G blew up on a song dissing, you know, a rival dissing an op.
Better recognize who you dealing with. Run up, gonna be a death. Leave a blicky looking all sticky, trippy paramedics looking for his chest. Catch him tired, cause you know them blicky, squicky, stupid niggas running Rick the best. Think they're hiding all behind they stick with Queenie, stupid. That's a scarf, is not a vest. Give him 2 pieces.
And then, you know, in as part of this very, you know, Brooklyn specific war.
Is that the Suburban song? Suburban?
Yeah, no Suburban.
No Suburban, right.
Yeah, with Chefs, yeah. In response to a song called Suburban.
Right.
It's a man down when we lurking. Pull up in all black, we purging. Pull up in all black Suburbans. If he ain't there, we reversing. Blicky gang know we gon' murk him. Blicky gang know we gon' murk him. If he ain't there, we reversing.
Then as Chef signs to a big label, all of a sudden they don't really want to talk about No Suburban anymore to the point where they literally won't allow him to answer questions about it. And
they were babysitting him on the interview, right? They had
absolutely. yeah. They're babysitting him in the interview. And, you know, they want the attention that comes with, you know, the gang rivalries, but not to answer for it and to kind of leave it behind. It's a complicated, tough dynamic when you get businesses and multinational public corporations in the middle of these scenes. It always has been, but I think with a lot of this stuff, it's sort of extra complicated.
Yeah, especially even people like you and I discussing it, you know, it's a fine line because, you know, it's not our lives or our realities yet.
Yeah,
you know,
I mean, this was why it was so important for us to have, you know, one of the reasons it was important for us to have Punch, you know, narrate it, not because he's, you know, not to say anything about his, you know, he is not in a gang or whatever, but he knows that's his neighborhood.
Right.
You know, he knows the details of this stuff intimately. And, you know, it just was good to see someone who actually, you know, we wanted someone who actually knows that world to help guide us through that territory.
It's important, the authenticity. I agree. And I think it's a great combination. I really enjoyed the Pop Smoke podcast. And again, it's a different lane for you as a journalist. as is the book. So yeah, we've talked about the now for a while. I do want to turn back the clock a little bit.
Of course.
You know, your story and your journey is a remarkable one. So I was just curious, basically, how you found hip hop, maybe your earliest holy shit moments of your youth, and maybe through Berkeley, and take me to rap, you know, from hip hop in your life to Rap Genius, you know? Sure.
So, you know, the earliest rap I remember, I would say rap related things are kind of twofold. First, there was kind of the breakdancing craze that swept the world in
Cardboard in the Driveway,
the early 80s, right? I remember it even sneaking its way into my elementary school. God knows we certainly didn't have any experts, but it was, you know, definitely people who thought they knew what they were doing. And just it being in pop culture, you know, certainly it was at the Olympics in '84 as sort of, you know, the New York City Breakers were there and all kinds of stuff like.
Homeboys, homegirls, the New York City Breakers.
So it's funny, Michael Holman I've ended up quoting this a lot lately. Michael Holman has had a great line in an interview that I did with him where he talked about b-boying being the lost leaders of hip hop, right? In that that was sort of the first art form to really break and never quite got the, you know, national money, whatever, you know, commercial potential, lasting commercial potential, but was really sort of the first part of hip hop to gain ultra national attention in this kind of massive way. So, you know, there was that. Also, a lot of the early stuff that came out of the Def Jam Rush Management axis was perfect for a young kid. You know, Run DMC, I think, had humor that definitely appealed to grade school kids.
Sure.
You know, if you think of like You Be Illin' or whatever, some of the jokes in there definitely appealed to me as a, you know, whatever, 4th, 5th grader, whatever.
Peter Piper, you know?
Yeah, right. Obviously nursery rhymes, right?
Now Peter Piper pick peppers, but run rock, rhyme, Humpty fell down. That's his art. Time, Jackie, nimble, what? Nimble, and he was quick, but jam, mass mud, faster Jack saw Jay's dick. Now little Bo Peep Cole lost her sheep, and Rip Van Winkle fell a hell asleep. And out of chilling summer in Wonderland, Jack serving Jill bucket in his hand. And damn at the stage making out that sound, the turntables might wobble, but they don't fall down.
So a lot of that stuff, Run DMC, Fat Boys, sort of stuff that I don't know if they thought of it as being geared for kids, but certainly was perfect for kids, are some of my earliest memories. You know, and it's been funny over the years to meet people who helped Run DMC, help the Beastie Boys, you know, get out to the wider world, right? In a business sense. Bill Adler's become a friend and mentor, and he, you know, was in charge of PR during that period for Def Jam. Run DMC wasn't on Def Jam, but, you know, similar deal, Rush Management, whatever.
Right.
And that has been just incredible for me to meet people and be like, wow, you personally were in part responsible for this thing reaching me out where I was in suburban New Jersey. So those are some early memories. You know, not long after that, got very deep into you know, I'd say like Public Enemy and NWA. Those were early mind-blowing experiences for me.
Yeah, boy!
Bass, how low can you go? Death row? What a brother, no. Once again, back is the incredible rhyme animal, the uncannibal thief. Public Enemy #1, 5-0 said freeze, and I got numb. Can I tell them that I really never had a gun? But it's the wax that the Terminator X spun. Now they got me
in the cell, cause my records they sell. Cause a brother like me said, well, Farrakhan's a prophet and I think you wanna listen to what he can say to you. What you ought to do is follow for now. Hell what the people say, make a miracle, keep up the lyrical. Black is back, all in, we're gonna win, check it out. Yeah, yo, come on. Here we go again.
You know, obviously some of the West Coast stuff that came along a few years after that. And then as I got in college, right, I went to, I think you mentioned this, Berklee College of Music. I was playing guitar and stuff. And I found that while in college, my listening went from some rap and lots of other stuff to almost all rap for a bunch of reasons, but in part because rap was not a music that I was making, right? So it became something that I could listen to for enjoyment and not have to worry about how did they do this? What scale are they using? Could I do that? It was just those weren't concerns in my universe, which is funny because of course I ended up dissecting rap years later at Genius, but you know, I had no idea that was coming. So, you know, I would say around college rap went from some of my listening to nearly all of it. And, you know, I was a musician for a long time. And then I think it was 2009. Wow, I can't believe it was that long ago. I stumbled across a website that was then called Rap Exegesis. Quickly changed its name because no one knows what exegesis means. But it was like someone had taken my brain and put it on the internet. I always thought of rap as kind of this ever expanding web or rap lyrics in particular, and music because of sampling, like this ever expanding web of references and call outs. And, you know, so if I would hear someone say something and it'd be a reference to an earlier song, I would almost visualize it as something resembling a hyperlink anyway. And so to actually see that on the internet was stunning. And I quickly got far too deeply involved in that website, initially as a hobby. You know, it's not like, you know, if someone had said, do you want to work there? It would have been like asking, do you want to win the lottery? Like, do I want to have my job be the thing I spend all my spare time doing? Sure. Yeah, it sounds great. I'd also, you know, love to come across a big bag of money on the ground. But, you know, it didn't seem possible. But, you know, eventually, you know, some VC money came in. It became a part-time and then a full-time job. And by the time that ended, I was sort of deeply enough ensconced in that world that I, you know, was like, well, okay, I'm doing this now, and ended up, you know, freelancing for a few years, writing for Forbes, doing some other stuff, and then ending up at Conflicts.
Word. Yeah, that's an amazing tale that mirrors my own in a number of ways. I'm also from suburban Jersey-Philadelphia, the Philly side of Jersey, and found hip hop not unlike the way you did, with many of the same signposts. I'm also a classically trained pianist, played piano till college, and then got into some other music and decided I would be writing about music instead of playing music. So the symbiosis there is not lost on me. And another thing, you know, my favorite band and some of my dearest friends are Lettuce, and they were at Berklee right around the time you were, Adam Deitch and Eric Krasno and Adam Smirnoff and so forth. And I'll never forget, you know, so we listen to many podcasts out in the West Coast while we trim ganja. It's just kind of like a way to pass the time, and you can sit there for hours on end, and it's kind of mindless work. So podcasts have been a real secret to our success, and also facilitate a lot of really worldly conversations with different people from around the world that are passing through, working on the farms, et cetera. And I bring this up because you were talking to Bill Stepney once on the Cipher, and he brought up Adam Deitch and Lettuce and talking about Berklee. And that was like a worlds collide moment for me, because here I am, like, you know, hip hop nerd, much like Adam Deitch, maybe not quite as deep as he is, but, and listening to you along with a friend of mine named Jackson Whalen, who's a underground MC in his own right. And it was just a mind-blowing moment of dot connecting. I picked up the phone and hollered at Deitch. I said, yo, I just listened to this podcast with Bill Stepney, and he talked about you. He was like, what? Where's that? So I sent him the show, and of course, and he was blown away by your show in general, and especially that episode. And that's emblematic of how I feel about the work that you do in general, but specifically with the Cipher, it's just a essential resource document chronicling the culture and the words of the people who lived it, who live the stories, who tell the stories. You brought up Bill Adler. Some of my favorite episodes are yours with him because, it's Christmas or whatever theme, and the stories that he tells from those times. And now knowing that that's what actually lit the fuse for you way back when, as a journalist and as a podcaster, when that happens and you actually can fulfill those lifelong, questions and wonders and with your heroes and the people that laid the foundation. I mean, I understand that. And I know that the Cipher was a labor of love, labor intensive, week after week after week, 300 some episodes, right?
It was about 250 by the time it was all said and done. Yeah.
Right. And I wanted to just basically hear, because I know that it's basically on indefinite hiatus and you've moved on to other endeavors that are as rewarding, probably more so financially, but also in regards to journalism and integrity and chronicling the culture. And if you look in the rear view mirror at the Cipher chapter, and I say, like, when you talk about the Mount Rushmore of hip hop podcast, you're on there. Combat Jack, Juan Ep, you, Questlove Supreme. That's my Rushmore of hip hop podcasts. And I would put Heat Rocks with O-Dub on there, but they kind of are a little bit wider of a range than just hip hop. But as somebody
O-Dub, former Cipher guest, as you know, definitely.
Of course. Yeah. And hopefully one day Upful Life guest from my lips to Ja ears. Much like yourself, I would love to speak to Oliver one day. And who knows, they're on hiatus right now, so maybe I should take my shot. But I digress. Any or all reflections you have about the Cipher project, you and Josh, all the people you interacted with, all the stories you told, as little or as much as you want to go in on that.
Sure. I mean, look, I hardly know what to say. Like, first, I just am amazed that, we did this thing, me and Josh and by the end, Rob Van Franken, who did a lot of the editing for sort of the last bit of the show, it was just an incredible experience. It started completely by accident. I had interviewed Jean Grey for intending just to cut it up in little pieces for the, then Rap Genius website. And we just had this conversation, and my now wife said, "You should make that a podcast." And I said, "What's a podcast?" And, talked to a tech savvy friend, and there it was. And we kept it moving. And I think, I'm really proud that, especially once, Josh and I really got our hands on it and named it the Cipher and were able to do what we wanted, that, we took time really to make it an archive. I always wanted, every time I sat down with someone, I always thought, this is it. This is the last time I'm going to talk to them. A lot of times, luckily, that wasn't the case, but I always wanted to treat it like, this is the last time. Let me get something that, someone in 20 years who's curious about, Elzai or Shaggy or, ESG or whomever is, this will be a resource for them. That is always how I approached it. And I think, we were successful with it. And it's been amazing to see, in the few years since we stopped doing it, a whole new wave of shows, including yours, of people who, listen to the Cipher and count it as an influence. Like, that has just been wild to see, and just makes me so happy, that it's living on. Yeah, I mean, look, so many memories. I'm looking back over the episodes now, and, each, because so many of them are recorded in Josh's house, there's just all these wild memories of, Johnny Rotten or Curtis Blow or whomever, just showing up at his apartment and playing with his dog or whatever, I remember his little dog really loved Boldy James. There's some fun photos of that. And just, I don't know, there was just so much I think some of our best work was with people who maybe are not household names, right?
I was going to say that.
If you look at Bill Stepney, you look at Nana Ashurst, look at the Monica Lynch episode, like just people who were in the industry and maybe, were right there, right? Say Adams actually taught me this. He said, something to the effect of like, because he was so close with the Beasties for so many years, he was like, there's always someone else in the room.
Right.
And a lot of times you will get as good or better recollections from the people in the room who maybe you haven't heard of at first.
Yes.
Because they haven't been asked about it 8 million times. So I think, some of our best work is with some of the names who maybe are a little less recognizable. So, if you're just hearing me now, for whatever reason, you're going back through the catalog, like if I would say every episode is worth hearing. And certainly if you don't know a name, that might even be all the more reason to listen to it. But just like, I don't know, so many memories, man, talking to Dr. Dre, the MTV Dr. Dre.
Yeah.
About Dick Gregory. And I think that happened like right after Trump's election. And so talking to him about that and just so many crazy experiences and, people we got to meet and crazy places we ended up at. And, unfortunately, a not insignificant subset of people we had as guests have passed on, right?
Indeed, yeah.
Sean Price, TC Islam, obviously Fred the Godson, Reggie, Combat Jack.
Yeah, the tribute episode was incredible. The Combat tribute, amazing.
Thank you. That was a lot of Josh's work in terms of like reaching out to people who, knew him, had worked with him.
Get ready for combat. Get ready for combat. Stand up.
Yo, internets. Tonight, I got an artist on this show that I'm very, very proud of, man. Coming from Brooklyn, my hometown, he's making incredible noise. 18 years old. Don't call him a rapper. He's a rap wonderkin, an integral part of the Pro Era Collective. Tonight, internets, on the Combat Jack Show, Complex TV, we bring to you Joey Badass. Brooklyn. Yo, what's up, Joey?
What up, though, man?
Yo, welcome to the Combat Jack Show, man.
Thank you, man. Thank you for having me here.
Nah, man, I like the movement, man.
I just, I'm so happy we did it. And, looking back on it, I think we have a real archive of stuff that hopefully will be useful to people for years and years to come.
Yeah, well, it certainly is. I can assure you that. I've turned a number of my friends onto it, and we've had really fascinating conversations about the conversations on your show. A really important point that you made was relative to the people behind the scenes, the other people in the room. And, when you talk about podcasting, especially these type of podcasts that are real niche oriented and, don't bring in tons of bucks, if any at all. But the stories that are told and the people that pass on, I want you to know that those episodes resonate with me the most. The people behind the scenes, the A&Rs, the journalists, the authors, the weed carrier, blunt rollers, all of it. And I try to do that. Those like quote unquote thankless episodes or people that aren't household names, because I know by the example that you set that those stories are even more important sometimes to tell and have more color, more context, and frankly, more accuracy than the bold font names. So if you ever wondered, like, did those land? I'm sure you didn't, because people have probably told you this a million times. They didn't just land. They inspired a whole part of my journalism and reporting, which is, as you so aptly put it, or Say Adams put it, the other people in the room. That has been a guiding force for me in storytelling in music culture, is to dig deeper beyond those we see on stage or the names on the records, whether that's who engineered the session or who wrote an article about this artist in 1987, and all points between. So I just wanted you to know, on behalf of hip hop fans and listeners, that those stories really, really matter. And I hope that I can do the same.
Thank you so much, Brian. I just can't tell you how much I appreciate it. Like we, you know, again, Josh and I worked so hard for years on this thing, and, you know, to know that it landed and the parts that we loved, you know, landed and inspired other people is so meaningful. Yeah, that's really great. I guess, you know, the other main thing I would say about the Cipher is just, it was so great to have a chance to just like sit down with people and ask them whatever I wanted, right? Like, Complex is a fantastic gig. I love it. You know, the shows we make, I am very proud of. The articles I've written, I'm very proud of. There is something qualitatively different about having something where, you know, the sole end result is whatever I want it to be, and I can ask whatever I want, and I can ask whatever I'm curious about, and it doesn't have to overlap with, you know, what might this audience who also likes other stuff want to hear. You know, maybe that was to the show's detriment in some ways, but ultimately I think it made it really singular, and it was just such a pleasure to do and be able to sit down with like all of those people and just, you know, follow my curiosity with, you know, when I talk to them.
Yeah, exactly. And it's funny you say specifically do your homework, because something I always enjoyed of the Cipher before I started my own pod would be when you just pull out a nugget on an artist from their past, and they would stop the story and say, damn, you really know your shit. You really did your homework. So occasionally,
I love those moments too, which is why we left so many of them in.
Right, exactly. I was going to say, so occasionally, not quite as frequently, occasionally that happens in my own interviews. And it's like the Yeezy taught me. It was like Setaro taught me. You know,
well, thank you so much, Brian. That's just so awesome. It really got me thinking about the shows here. It really was like, you know, it really was an experience to do, and I'm so grateful that they're there and that people are still listening to them. And I just, you know, hope those episodes continue to get discovered. And, you know, Josh and I are both still in podcasting. So, you know, we're still around. We're still in New York. We're still friends. Anything is possible down the line.
Anything's possible. Anything's possible.
You know, we had there right after we put the show on hiatus, there were some talks about, you know, bringing it back that ended up not quite going anywhere, but it's still, you know, it could happen. Yeah, certainly.
Well, of course, we would love to see it and support it however we could, financially, on social, whatever. That said, the legacy is intact. If you never do another episode, what you built speaks for itself. And I've been back I've listened to some episodes 3 and 4 times because there's always something that I missed or something that now makes a little more sense to me than it did 2 years ago. And I think that that's the magic of the evergreen podcast, the sort of culture reporting of that nature is it's not, you know, era specific or newsworthy or not. It's music culture storytelling, and it's evergreen. And when you do it to the level that you have with Josh and with your partners at Complex, you know, that stuff is still as important and oftentimes more so in the rear view mirror. But I wanted to finish. I know we're getting at an hour here. I'd be remiss if I didn't touch on Complex, because you have an interesting dichotomy and really interesting if you think back to the old school backpacker versus radio hip hop conundrum. Nobody has few have the bona fides in terms of cred with underground hip hop and that whole integrity side of the culture with what we've described, all the stuff we've talked about you've done, yet you work for the flagship hip hop site / magazine / culture brand that exists in a macro sense around not just hip hop, but pop culture at large. What is your role with Complex, and how do you straddle those worlds?
Okay, great. I mean, great question. My role currently, and this changed within the past few months, is just writing and reporting podcasts. That's my sole job there. For a long time, like you were sort of alluding to, you know, even while I was creating the Tekashi podcast, I was also a staff writer. So also writing articles, features, profiles, whatever. And before that, you know, as a news writer, writing, you know, whatever, you know, was popping on Twitter that day or whatever, try to get it into 300 words. So, you know, really sort of went up the ranks there, starting literally as the overnight news guy, you know, working 12 to 4 or whatever, and moving up the ranks. It's been interesting. I think during my time as a feature writer, I always tried to find the crossover point between things that I was interested in and things the audience would like. A lot of times that worked. Sometimes it didn't. Sometimes I had to move further to one side or the other of that, you know, of that equation. But I always tried to balance that. And I think you can see that in the work there, you know, in both the articles and some of the videos I did. You know, I was able to have a number of videos on there where I was able to talk to producers about and songwriters about their hits, about their work that is not dissimilar to the Cipher. You know, I actually brought D. Angeletti back, who I had interviewed as a guest on the Cipher in its early days.
Yeah.
Brought him back for oh, excuse me. No, it wasn't him. I apologize. Ron Amon-Ra Lawrence, who also had been a guest on the Cipher.
That's one of my favorite Cipher apps.
Yeah,
Amen,
brought him to Complex to do a similar thing that was, you know, shortened obviously and breaking down, you know, primarily breaking down his bad boy hits.
Eating life, money, power, respect, eating right, money, power, respect.
Yeah. Hey, yo, my whole clique bout it. We take yours while you pout about it. Truck, step out, the whores wanna crowd around it. You can see me on Optimum TV. On your bathroom, turn the light out, scream, Bloody Mary, 1, 2, 3.
You know, so there's stuff in there that was not dissimilar. Or taking that general approach, right? I talked to the songwriter Pooh Bear, who's best known for his work with Justin Bieber. And while that's not necessarily something that, you know, I might have taken on the Cipher, I had talked to so many songwriters at that point, and I was actually interested in his process and his writing, and tried to take that same sort of like questioning analytic approach and kind of throw it in this context. So yeah, so I would say like there's a lot of stuff I did there, both about music and otherwise, that, you know, I always tried to find the sweet spot between stuff I was interested in and stuff that, you know, we thought the audience would like. I guess that's the short answer of like how I handled and continue to handle my time at Complex. And like once we land on something, then I try to bring, you know, sort of all of my resources to bear on it once we land on the subject matter.
Gotcha. Yeah, man, it's remarkable, all of it, the whole umbrella. And I've always been curious as to, you know, the prism in which you see the work that you do at Complex. I can appreciate, you know, much like they say, the instrumental virtuosos, well, can you write a 3-minute song with a good hook? Well, like you can tell a story in 6 podcast episodes or do a 90-minute interview, but can you tell someone what happened in 300 words? It's a different thing. Mm-hmm. And to be able to kind of, you know, shoehorn what you do into those different frameworks and without, you know, losing any of the authenticity or integrity or, you know, how informed it is. Again, you know, I don't want to gas you up any more than I already have, but you inspire. And even just where you are right now, as somebody, I'm 43, so I would imagine I'm a couple of years younger than you, but same kind of window of our lives. And I've asked myself a number of times over the past 2 decades, like, can I do this? Can I, you know, make it, take care of myself, make a living, make my way in this world as a journalist? And, you know, Sometimes it's yes, sometimes I get discouraged, sometimes I take on a second job, whatever. But when I see folks like you doing what you're doing, it's a battery in my back. So thank you. And thank you for telling your story and your journey. I know it's going to resonate with a number of my listeners. And at the very least, it's a pelt on the wall for me personally. So I give thanks.
Thank you, Brian. I'm thrilled to do it. And thank you so much for all the kind words. And, again, just a final plug for your audience. Dummy Boy, published by Kingston Imperial. Make sure to pre-order it, or if by the time you're listening it's out, go buy it. It really is, the culmination of years worth of work on this topic. And thank you so much for everything, man. I again, all of the kind words about everything I've done. Like, you really get it, and I really appreciate it.
As do we, and the feelings are mutual. And I'll plug your book too. It'll be in the show notes, the links. And I toured through it in 2 sittings. My flight from Oakland to Philly, and then 3 hours on the beach.
Amazing.
And I don't care for Tekashi, and I find a lot of the content repugnant, and I could not put it down.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Many blessings, and we'll talk again, my friend.
For sure. All right. Take care.
We rock the mic right when we're on the mic. We rock the mic right when we're on the mic. We rock the mic right when we're on the mic. We rock I shall proceed and continue to rock the mic. I shall proceed and continue to rock the mic. I shall proceed and continue to rock the mic. I shall to rock the show. Just think what? If you could just blink what? Blink yourself away. Just think what? If you could just blink what? Blink yourself away. Jeff X can rock the mic with tooth decay. Well, it's the 5'7", residing at the Mecca rest address in South Section. Used to cut glass in the infinite pursuit of ass back in 86. Easy with the chicks, I was the chocolate boy. Raised in the
Yes, indeedy. Want to say thank you and a deep bow of gratitude to same old Shawn Setaro, for that quite illuminating and inspiring and at times kind of horrifying conversation. Certainly appreciate the depth with which he discussed his book, which is called Complex Presents Dummy Boy, Tekashi 6ix9ine and the 9 Trey Gangsta Bloods, which is out now. And like I said, to him and in the introduction, I found the content objectionable and abhorrent, yet he really took us inside, told a human story, and I couldn't put the book down. I read it in 2 sittings, and it's not short. So check that out if you're curious. Also check him out, his various podcasts. He's got the one about Tekashi called Infamous, as well as a Complex Subject about Pop Smoke. And since we spoke, he came out with another one through Complex. I think it's also called Complex Subject, but it's about YNW Melly. It's a Florida drill rapper, part of the same sort of strange, violent, also creative and unique to this moment that is the drill scene. And look, it's all over the country. It originated in Chicago with, Chief Keef, but really kind of metastasized into all these different urban centers around the world. And there's a channel I mentioned earlier called Trap Lore Ross. It's a YouTube channel and fella over there in England who makes these tremendously fascinating documentaries about this culture. The good, the bad, the ugly, from the music to the violence to the social media dialogue. And he's actually a hilarious cat over there with his accent and kind of just, he really has his thumb on the pulse of the culture. So in the aftermath of this conversation I had with Shawn that you just heard, I've been off the deep end for months just watching and learning, and not just through Trap Lore Ross, but he was certainly gave me the keys to Pandora's box, if you will. And so did Shawn Setaro and these books, his book and these podcasts. So all that to say, as we discussed, Shawn inspired this show as much as anyone, and it's modeled after the Cipher show. And without him, I'm not sure that I would really know what the hell I'm doing here. So big up yourself, Shawn Setaro. Check out his book. And binge on the old Cipher Show podcast, because they're evergreen and it's hip-hop history, and the parade of luminaries that blessed those pod waves is a deep, deep well. So, yes, indeedy. Next up, hopefully Jay Smooth. If you're out there, Jay Smooth, Ill Doctrine Radio, we love you. I would love to roll out the same red carpet for you, my friend. Now, you're listening to The Roots, live from 94. And this is like their earliest tour, if you will. And it's from Montreux in 94. And, of course, we talked about the passing of Hub, the international bass pimp, Leonardo Del Hubrio. And like I mentioned, you can read my reflections on his passing and the Roots, and just sort of a personalized eulogy, if you will, for a long gone time and place at Philadelphia, Black Lily, OK Player. It was therapeutic to write that up. And another thing I wanted to put on everyone's radar is kind of like my biggest article of the year. It's a lengthy feature of my favorite records from the calendar year. So this year it's 21 albums in 2021. So I reviewed 21 records, and then I also included another 21 that I love just about as much, but I'm not going to write 42 album capsules. At least not yet, till somebody's paying me. But that said, I also give you 21 songs, most of which aren't found on the albums. A couple are, but most are not. And then a handful of DJ sets, mixes, and officially released live albums. So this is a months-long process, 100 days. And I put a lot into it. It's kind of like a passion project, a labor of love. I was thinking about maybe doing a podcast of this content, and who knows, maybe I will. But for now, I just wanted to put it on people's radar and tell you that it's out there. It has playlists, both Spotify playlists for the album stuff, SoundCloud playlist for the DJ sets. Of course, I made mention of the tragic passing of Charles I when writing about his most recent solo album, Solace. And, for a minute, I know I spoke on some other passings earlier, but I just got to offer a moment of mourning for Charles I, prodigal son of Truckee, California, devastating loss on so many levels. As I wrote in the feature, I remember when I first got hip to Charles back in 2017, barely out of his teens, making waves in the then nascent emotive brand of ethereal, psychedelic future bass. And I was living in Nevada City at the time, so nearby Nevada City's notoriously elitist dance floor generals were hype on the young bull, and I took notice early and often. And the first time I heard Versicolor or his Running Through the Forest EP, I made a mental note, this kid is going places. So, yeah, rest in beats, Charles I, so tragic. But that's one of the 21 records. A few others include Gone Gone Beyond's 2030, which might be my absolute favorite. We've got Nigel Hall's Spiritual and Salt 9 and Ultimate Fantastic, Judith Hill, Neil Francis, Nubia Garcia, Movie Club, Madlib, Rising Appalachia, Nth Power. I could go on. I don't want to spoil it. I would love for people to go check it out. It's the top story on UpfulLife.com. 21 favorite records of 2021 and more. I do have a link on there if you'd like to donate. If you'd like to somehow support this work, you can just drop a few bucks in my Venmo or PayPal. Obviously, the content's free, but notice the site has no ads. So, hey now, you like what I'm putting out there? If you're picking up what I'm putting down, please tip your bartenders. And with that, let's shift into the Vibe Junkie Jam, like we always do about this time. And it's going to be a twofer to represent threefer. So we've got the Roots going in the background. We all know, as I spoke earlier, about GREG TATE and what he was about. with regard to black music and hip hop and the annals of the culture. So this whole segment is dedicated to GREG TATE. And really, you know, I think everything that all of us do, the J Smooths, the Shawn Setaros, myself, Amir Questlove Thompson, it's all for GREG TATE, because of GREG TATE and for GREG TATE. So the Vibe Junkie Jam of the Week will be dedicated to GREG TATE, and it will include, we'll start with Robbie Shakespeare, Sly and Robbie. As I mentioned earlier, Black Uhuru, early 80s, hands down my favorite reggae music ever created. It is more beyond words. I think I called it drugs earlier, but that's a disservice. It's better than drugs. It's magical potion. So my favorite song is Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, Natty Dreadlocks, because, you know, that was kind of like the theme music that followed me around when I wore a head of locks. So we're going to play a classic Guess Who's Coming to Dinner from 1981, the iconic Black Uhuru lineup that I never saw. I did see Sly and Robbie play with Black Uhuru in Burlington, Vermont in 1997 at the Memorial Auditorium. Part of the reason why they're my favorite. But when you're talking about their absolute apex as a unit, it's Michael Rose and Ducky and Puma and Sly and Robbie. And that's like 80 to 83, 84 as far as I know. So we're going 81. Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, Natty Dreadlocks from Germany. And then we're going to go with a tribute to Hub, Leonardo Del Hubrio, Leonard Hubbard, the late, great, longtime bassist of the legendary Roots crew, Illa Fifth Dynamite, all the way live from the 215. Y'all know how we do. And I'm going to pick a song near and dear to my heart. It's called Water, or as we say back home, Wooder. And it's from their album Phrenology, which I wrote about the record release party in that eulogy. But the album Phrenology has the song Wooder, but it was meant for Black Thought's never released solo album, which was going to be called Masterpiece Theater, and a couple songs off of Phrenology were originally meant for that album. Anyway, I digress. Water is a letter from Black Thought and the Roots as a crew to former member Malik B, who actually passed away last year as well. But at the time he was still alive, and it's no secret, is struggling with drug addiction, and it's a big part of the reason why he sort of wandered away from the Roots crew while they were blowing up. And if you know, the first few albums, there are two MCs. I mean, a lot of times you got Scratch up there and Rahzel as well, but when it comes to verses and rapping, you have Malik and Black Thought, and then all of a sudden you just had Black Thought, and people wondered why. And so Black Thought tells you why in the song Water. It's gripping, emotional, personal, deep song that's obviously, for my own reasons, I'm just closely connected to. So that's how we're going to finish it up. Hub on the bass. It's live from North Sea Jazz Festival 2003. It's an incredible song. It's kind of like halftime drum and bass hip hop, light years ahead of its time. Black Thought, like we already know, he's unfuckwittable, but if you ever wondered if he had the emotional page in the Black Thought handbook, well, you're about to find the fuck out. So rest in peace, Malik B. Rest in peace, Leonardo Del Hubrio, international bass pimp. Rest in peace, GREG Tate. Rest in peace, Charles I. Rest in peace, Robbie Shakespeare. Fuck. We'll see you next time. Goodbye. God bless. Yes, indeedy.
This for my mellow man, the way we do it like this that for my mellow man, it's like that for my mellow man, the way we do it like that, this for my mellow man, it's like this for my mellow man. coming to dinner. Not to say that. I want you to sing after me. Guess who's coming to dinner? Not the dreadlocks. Sing it out. Guess who's coming to dinner? Not the dreadlocks. I wanna hear you. Guess who's coming to dinner? Not the dreadlocks. Whoa. Guess who's coming to dinner? Not the dreadlocks. So let's give thanks and praise, not the dreadlocks. For the eyes that feed, not the dreadlocks. Oh, guess who's coming to dinner? Not the dreadlocks. Guess who's coming to dinner? Not the dreadlocks. Yeah.
South Philly, North Side, Oakland, Texas, Universal, Worldwide, bounce for me, touch something, Holland, get high, do it for me, North Sea, taste on it, They say a record ain't nothing if it's not touching, whipping, draw you in closer, make you wanna listen to it. If you real ill and making music, then listen, nothing like you living through it. That's how my nigga do it. I'm at Slacks back in like 91 rapping. We went to Miller's to get away from gun clapping. It ain't last. I be in class dreaming about 50,000 fans in the stands screaming it out. Encore, I'm headed back to Philly. Hey yo, you rolling with me? I'm trying to get busy. We walked on, that was off the chain. A lot of times it shows people hardly came. I just took it in stride as part of the game. But aside, people down when we started to change. It was a couple things, little serve, little bills. Instead of riding out on the road, you rather chill. I know the way the pleasure feels. I ain't judging, but still, I'm on a mission, I'm not bugging. I got bam, can't stop drugging and can't sleep. They can't stick to one subject and can't eat. It's people steady coming at me out in the street. Like, going up with your beats and get deep, nigga. You need to walk straight, master your high. So you missing out on what's passing you by. I done seen the streets suck a lot of cats dry. Not you and I, you know why. We got to get up, y'all. Over, the one time. Get it. It's cold water, y'all. Bad water, y'all. We done been through many fields and a couple of deals. We done the shit, clothes and wheels, hip, mics and reels. The rock shows a pro, slept on floor. Trying to figure what the fuck we getting slept on for. What are we walking with the weapon for? Weighted by the gravity law. You know when if you came up poor. Yo, picture the bus up north. Mary made her everything out. Laws are made her. I'm far from a hater. And I don't say I love you cause the way I feel is greater. And remember you a poet, son, you a born creator. It'll probably dawn on you later. It's in your nature, lyrics on your walls, like they made of paper. You gotta follow in your talent, take your money, you can fuck around and finally make it. That's real, but check. Ladies and gentlemen, this is something special. Everybody get over the water. It's called water, y'all. Bad water, come on. I want you all to understand I come from South Philly. And when I walk the street it's like a pharmacy. They got all type of shit anybody can get. Go from extra, loosey cigarette to my ghetto legend. Known for little shites running. Pop go deep, popcorn, keep coming and dumbing and just embracing the dope like it's a woman. You're burning both sides of the rope and just pulling and tugging. In between the slime and straight thugging. Laying every day around the way and doing nothing. See them looking, shaking their head and getting strong and they don't got a man like mine, you got a cousin and yo, you better be a true friend to him. Before the shit, put an end to him, or give a pen to him. Or lock him in the studio with a mic, on a villain mic, save his life, I keep telling him jump. Master your high, what's passing you by? Suck a lot of cash dry. Ladies and gentlemen, special request one to all rude boy damn up and pump it up, rude boy damn up. It's called water, y'all. Burn. Shit. How y'all feel out there, ladies and gentlemen? Y'all still with us or what? If y'all still with us, make a little bit of noise. Throw one hand in the air, something. You know what I'm saying? Let me know, I can't tell it. Just to let you know you are now rocking with the best of legendary short shot. Roots crew from Philadelphia, PA. Want y'all put y'all hands together for a few members of my squad. Ladies and gentlemen, all the way from Jamaica, Delphia, holding it down, maintaining the pocket. Give it up for my brethren, F Knuckles on percussion. Put your hands together. Give it up, whoa! Yeah! Thank you. Okay, for real. We got my man holding it down on some serious shit all the way from San Francisco, California. I like to call him the Reverend Doctor. We're blessed to have the soulful sounds on vocals and guitar from our good brother, Mr. Martin Luther. Ladies and gentlemen, show your love. As I continue on, all the way from the city of Philly, we got my man Martilla, the keyboard killer. Please give him a round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. Put your hands together, Mar Dog, holding it down on the keyboards for the legendary Roots crew. One of the baddest drummers on the earth, ladies and gentlemen. We're blessed to have him right here with us. Give it up for the mighty Questlove, maintaining the pace on drums. Thank you. And the newest addition to the squad from Flatbush, Brooklyn, New York. Give it up for the string assassin, Captain Kirk, make your body work, Douglas on guitar. Ladies and gentlemen, Captain Kirk on guitar, Kirk Douglas. Thank you. I want y'all to taste on it. What it tastes like, y'all. What it tastes like. Check it out, man. Whoa. For real. Yeah. Check it out. Raspberry kisses on me. You looking for direction, girl? I feel feel your vision on me. Don't let them see you sweating. We ain't supposed to be involved, but you know when we get it all, girl, I mean it all. Keeping you feeding till you're taking it toss. When I'm breaking it off, it's no denying the fact it's wrong. You got a man who probably playing his part. You probably breaking his heart. He trying to figure the reason you're going. Is it cause he's superficial or just too submissive? Or did I come along and hit you with the futuristic? Or is it cause you really couldn't see a future with him? He bought his paper but never took time for you to listen. You want to grip up, flip his phone and get stripped and shown. No way to get in the zone, of course. Dealing with this, you won't be taking a loss. You should leave him alone. Roll with me cause I'm breaking you off. I'm coming to break you. For real. I'm coming to break you. Yes. I'm coming to break you. Listening to Shawty, singing how to smooth operator moving my way. You sit in beside me, looking like you're Friday. Boston pancreas structure, just look at your body. Keep each other thirsty, kisses like Hershey. Lips is sealed, we don't need a controversy. I say I'm Italian, say you want it in the worst way. I know you told your man a little something, but meanwhile, something nice laying the eyes. Ready for the freakiest things you done in your life. Break it down like we road dogs, pulling the highs. Making sounds like the vibe, got you reaching your height. Prepare for flight, it's your captain. I'm getting strapped in, it's no denying the strength of this attraction, girl. Dealing with this, you won't be taking a loss. Stop fooling your man, roll with me because I'm breaking you off. Just clap your hands, everybody. And everybody just clap your hands. Look, fly girl, clap your hands. And homeboys, make some noise. And to the bang bang boogie. Up jump the boogie to the rhythm of the boogie. Now what you get is not a turn. Who's definitely came to flirt. To the ladies in the place, if you feeling the bass, my man said lift up y'all shirt. Because I am on the mic, but I like to say hello. We gon' twist a little something, get real mouth. First we gon' just, first look, bang, bang the boogie, boogie. Up jump the boogie to the bang, bang boogie. That's what I'm talking about. Look, rock the rhythm that'll make your body rock it, rock it, rock it, rock it. Yeah. Leonard Hubbard, bass man, ladies and gentlemen. Y'all still with us or what? Ladies